Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Ontario's Senator Jim Munson is well known to Canadians for the decades he spent as a national radio and television reporter. After his time in the media was done, he went to work for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien as his Director of Communications and was then appointed to the Senate. Jim Munson has had a lifetime filled with interesting stories and memorable moments, and he joins me now to talk all about his life beyond politics. Senator Jim Munson, it is great to have you here. Welcome to Beyond Politics.
It's great to be with you, Catherine.
Well, yeah. It's fun to interview you because this effectively is your medium, maybe your old medium from which you've retired, but this is, you were in media for so long. It was such a part of who you are.
But fame is fleeting. I think you had Senator Duffy on this program.
Yes.
And he would understand how fame is fleeting. And I'd like to tell you just a very brief
oh dear.
CPAC story.
Okay.
And it goes something like this.
Oh, yes.
Here I am, CTV, 25 years, radio, 14 years before that.
Right.
And working for Mr. Chrétien, and now a senator. And I'm working out on a Stairmaster machine in Moncton, New Brunswick. And I'm feeling pretty good about it that particular morning. And there's a woman beside me. And she's working out too, and she looks up and sees CPAC on. And she sees me asking a question at a Senate committee. And she kept looking left, right, left. And moments after that, she got off the machine, I got off the machine, and she said, now listen, normally I don't talk to strangers. But is it press or politics? And I smugly said, well, madam, it was both. And she looked at me and she said, oh my goodness, didn't you used to be Jim Munson? And I said, yes, ma'am, I used to be Jim Munson. So if you're taking yourself too seriously in this business,
yes.
Don't.
Okay.
So I use that story as a way to keep myself loose and as difficult, as humble as I can be.
You know, it's true though. It really, that's one of the things that people often say to children of former politicians, will you run? And I always say, when you've seen the other side and you've seen how government is critical and our democracy is critical to Canadians, and yet they just want it done effectively. They don't really care necessarily who's doing it. Mm-hmm. And so if you have any kind of ego associated with that, you should really remove it quite quickly, because you get into a ballot box and people just,
you're right.
They just,
yeah.
It has really not a lot to do with you, frankly, I think. So it's true that you have to check your ego at the door.
Well, you have to, and once you get into politics, you realize that people in politics, and in my working with Mr. Chrétien and others, in my position as Director of Communications for Mr. Chrétien, you realize that this is an interesting part of your life, that people are actually trying to work for the common good. And as a reporter, when I would walk to the Hill, I would wonder, what are they up to now? What are they doing inside those rooms? What is going on there? And you sort of have a tendency as a reporter to look for the bad but not the good, or trying to find that balance to make sure that you keep politicians on guard. But once you're inside that room, it's amazing, with bureaucrats and people around the Prime Minister or ministers or MPs, that you sit down and say, oh my goodness, if I had known all the things that are going on here now that I did not know when I was a reporter, I think I would have been even more fair in the sense of dealing with politicians, because A, they have lives, B, they have a commitment to public service, and C, they have families. And so they have to live and breathe the same environment that we all breathe on Parliament Hill, and it can get kind of polluted from time to time, and it has a tendency from time to time not to being a very nice place. But I think there's more good than anything else, because why do we all come here in the first place? As journalists, we come to cover the situation and to keep our eyes and ears on what is going on. But programs, whatever government's in power, they're trying to do something for the public good, and that's what I learned inside.
You must have taken a lot of ribbing, though, from journalistic colleagues when you made that transition to I think you may have referred to as the dark side.
Well, I think we all do, and I don't know why it looked at it as a dark side. When I received the call from Mr. Chrétien, and I had been out of work after receiving my liberation notice at CTV, and being 55 years of age, at that particular time I was sad, I was angry.
I bet.
But I didn't know what I was going to do, and I felt what I felt. I was my own story. Here I covered people who lost their jobs at Nortel and people who lost their jobs across this country. And here I have this package in front of me and saying, you're going now because we're tightening things up, we're doing new things, we're changing the guard, whatever the excuse or argument was. But here was a package in front of me. And when I went home to the Maritimes over the years, I'd always talk to, as they would say, a buddy, a friend. And I said, how are you doing? Well, I got the package. And I always wondered, what did the package look like? Never thinking that I was going to see a severance package.
And then you knew.
But I knew. And it was upsetting. It was really upsetting. But it was kind of interesting. The Prime Minister called a couple of months later, Mr. Chrétien, and he offered me work. And I stopped and said, oh, my goodness, I'll think about it. Well, my wife told me, who was that on the phone? Well, it was Mr. Chrétien. What did he want?
He wanted to give me a job.
He wanted to give me a job. And she said, what did you say? What did you say? Well, I said, well, it is the dark side. And I told him I think about it. And she said, Jimmy, you're 55 years old. You're unemployed. We have a mortgage. 2 boys in university. And you just told the Prime Minister of Canada that you'll think about it?
Did she use more colorful language than that?
She sure did.
Okay.
She's a very, very colorful woman. And
I was just going to say probably most wives would.
Yeah. So I did call him back, and the rest is history. And what I discovered, and I alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, is that it was just a fascinating place to be. And I would say that any person who gets a call from a Prime Minister and has the opportunity to work in the Prime Minister's office, take it. Because it's not so much of an ego trip, but it's being part of public policy and being in that room. And sure, media friends laughed at me and so on and so forth, but they were very kind, because I think they were supportive in the sense that they wanted to see one of them back on his or her feet. Enlightenment, I think, is a word. You dealt with the Privy Council office, you dealt with deputy ministers, you dealt with other ministers, and I was able to operate the PMO as a newsroom, at least the communications part of it all. In other words, we call back. I understood the mind of the reporter. I understood some devious minds of reporters. I understood people calling at the last minute at 6 o'clock at night saying, this is my story, what's your comment? Well, I learned to deal with that. But I tried to work in a very collegial environment and had my staff at that time. We called back, we tried to inform. It was my view that you have to be on the page. Sometimes there's an attitude inside, a bunker kind of mentality inside Prime Minister's offices and ministers' offices. If you hide long enough, it'll go away. But it never goes away. Mm-hmm. So I decided, let's be on the page. If it was the National Post, well, let's be on the page, let's answer. And let's not just necessarily get the Prime Minister, but let's bring them in, let's talk to them to have our side of the story. So I was able to adapt those more than 30 years of work as a reporter into facilitating and hopefully, helping, reporters along the way to get our side of the story. It was a big but necessary jump into what some would describe the abyss, but I would describe it as a moment in my life. I mean, I've covered a lot of things as a journalist, but those almost 2 years in the Prime Minister's office was special. Not going to war in Iraq, you're at 24 Sussex, you're talking to the Prime Minister. I remember one person influenced him not to go to Iraq, but he asked me, he would ask everybody, Mr. Chrétien, what do you think? And my answer at that particular time, it's not what you think, Prime Minister. It's what do you think your grandchildren, the 4 of them, would think. It's what my children would think. Do they want to go to a war in Iraq? an illegal war in Iraq without, having the support of the United Nations. They were upset. Young people were upset. And so, you were able to participate in public
history, really.
in public policy. And so you sat back, and of course he would talk to others in foreign affairs and defense and the rest of it, and of course he was under tremendous pressure. But that's just one example of the role you played, and I pinched myself sometime because it was, to be on the Hill and to be working with a Prime Minister is a good place to be, despite the pressure.
Take me a step back, well, several steps back, to where it all started, because you grew up the son of a United Church minister. So this idea of journalism as a career, or even working for a Prime Minister, sitting in the Senate, these were probably not career options that you had necessarily planned out as a child.
Yeah.
So what did you want to be when you were a kid? Did you have an idea?
I grew up in Campbellton, New Brunswick, and it was a real nice place to grow up in. And we did not have a television, if you can believe that.
I can.
We did not have a television because there were no televisions. Only the rich people, 4 families in Campbellton, New Brunswick, had a television. But I read a lot. And the train would come in every day with the St. John Telegraph and other newspapers. And so I was a paper boy. And I still have this imagery of being by the train station at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's dusk. It's the middle of winter. The steam is rising from the engines and the newspapers are being thrown out. And I delivered my paper. And I also listened to radio a lot. And but I was always late in delivering the paper because I read it first.
Did you really? Did you stay at the train station?
I stayed
and read
there,
it?
and it was. I did, along with other paper boys.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
How old were you when you were delivering papers?
Oh, 10 or 11.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had more than that. I had delivered the St. John Telegraph, the Campbellton Graphic, the Campbellton Tribune.
You must have been really late if you were reading all of them.
I even delivered Liberty Magazine, which was a magazine out for a while. It was up against Maclean's magazine. And, of course, to the United Church Observer.
Right.
But that was to a select group of people. However, I listened to radio, and I had my own pretend radio set, and I always had this idea that a radio was a magical place. And, you knew when you're not feeling well when you listened to the Dominion time signal followed by the ... long dash, and you're home. And so I loved radio. I loved newspapers. And so in our home, my father was political in his own way.
Meaning what?
Well, when we moved to Montreal, to the South Shore of Montreal, he led a group of ministers to Quebec City and took on René Lévesque. And reminded him about, my dad liked to talk about the Dominion of Canada, firmly believed in a dominion from sea to sea.
Right.
And sea. And so he was very much a passionate Canadian. And so sometimes in his sermons in the pulpit, you heard more philosophy and politics than you would hear about the Bible or any of those things. But
that would help shape your worldview.
Well, absolutely.
Too, in a way.
But I was also a mischievous minister's son, so he helped shape my way to get out of the United Church Manse as quickly as possible.
You had no illusions that you would be a minister?
None.
Okay.
None. No, none. Although I did find my own pulpit, I guess, in a way.
In a way.
In a way. But he helped me put together these tapes to radio stations. I graduated from high school. I wasn't ready, put it this way, for university at that time, although I did go later. And he helped me put some tapes together. And so I had 33 rejections.
Wow.
Yeah, and I still have them. Try something else.
You kept them all?
I've kept many of them.
Wow.
I have them at home. And so he helped me on the way. And I got accepted at CJLS in Yarmouth.
Was this the only acceptance?
The only acceptance. $32 a week. I sound incredibly older, I guess. But that was 1965.
Okay.
Yeah, 1965. And I ended up working at this radio station. And that's when I ended up doing everything, from doing shows in the morning to...
But what terrific training.
Pardon me?
What terrific training.
It was.
When you have to do everything, you learn how to do everything, and you're just so much better prepared.
Well, I did say one time that this station was so poor, didn't have any money, it couldn't afford wire service machines, for example, getting CP or Associated Press or UPI of the day, that I would have to read the newscast out of the Halifax Chronicle-Herald, which is 200 miles away. And so they were put in front of me. I had no time to go over it. And I remember reading my first newscast where I said, Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson said today, if Canadians don't tighten their belts, we're all going to suffer from serious inflation. I thought it was a stomach disorder. I had never seen that word. Inflation had never existed. And so those are the, part of the people would go home at noon to see how many mistakes I would make in reading a newscast. And then, of course, I had my first ever interview.
Yes, with just a small local personage.
Well, he came to town. His name was John Diefenbaker.
Yes.
And I had seen all these trench coat men on Parliament Hill on television looking very important, meaning reporters, not RCMP.
Okay.
And I thought, my goodness, here they come down the street to the radio station.
You could see them coming.
Coming with Mr. Diefenbaker, with their microphones. And once again, there was a spark saying, well, maybe one day I can work on Parliament Hill. I hope this interview goes really well with Mr. Diefenbaker. And so he comes through the door, and I had classic stage fright.
Oh, no.
I was intimidated by those. They had the collars turned up.
And
that's
he
very
wasn't
impressive.
Exactly a teddy bear,
no.
Mr. Diefenbaker.
And so I looked up to him like I do to most people in life. And he came in, and it's an old kind of radio station with the turnstiles, and I shook hands with him, and I sat down with him. And this was a by-election. The reason why he was in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, was for a by-election for a man named John O. Bauer. I don't know how we can remember all these names, and I said to Mr. Diefenbaker, and I was shaking, I said, Mr. Diefenbaker, welcome to Yarmouth and CJLS Radio. Well, thank you very much. 30 minutes later, I'm serious, I said, thank you very, very much. And up until this point, I think it was the best interview I've ever been involved in, because and he said all kinds of things, and there were all the scribes writing everything down dutifully. And as they left, I thought, well, maybe one day. So I always had dreams.
You weren't disappointed?
I wasn't disappointed because the radio station was owned by progressive conservatives, so they were happy.
This was very, this was an effective career move.
Yeah, I didn't know it was a career move, but my career move went.
Yes.
But I kept thinking, because I just live with dreams. I know people always have strategically a game plan of what they want to do in life,
right.
But I always had a dream of maybe if I do this and so on. So I went back to northern New Brunswick. I got accepted after 1 year in Yarmouth, and then I went to Montreal and
working in radio stations the whole way through.
Yeah, I wanted to go back or go to university, so I did
Were
a security.
You worried if you did that, if you went back to university, that you'd lose your?
But I kept working at the same time, and that's what happened. Is that on my resume, it's I attended.
Okay.
There are no degrees. Yes. I attended.
Okay.
You have to do that, because it will come up and haunt you later in life.
Yes.
If you don't tell the truth. But I ended up in Montreal after Bathurst in northern New Brunswick, where I met my wife. And my dad was adamant that I go to university because I had a brother who picked up a number of degrees. And so I was going to university at Loyola, which is now Concordia.
Yeah.
And but I was working in radio at the same time, and that's when the FLQ crisis happened.
Wow.
So I walked into another situation, and I did know how to ask questions then. And I did know how to work, and I had my mobile unit and ran the streets of Montreal, covering fires and Mayor Jean Drapeau and robberies until the FLQ crisis happened.
Right.
And that time really opened up my eyes and ears to everything. It was more than just cops and robbers and fires and a politician. It was about a national crisis, and I ended up. Because I had my police radio on when they had kidnapped James Cross, but also Pierre Laporte. I was one of the few reporters that ended up on the St. Hubert Air Base running across this field as they opened up the trunk of the car.
And found him.
And found him. And my life changed at that moment as a reporter. Up until that point, it was fun, but I realized I had a responsibility. And I remember reporting back to the radio station CKGM, and Pierre Laporte, has died at the hands. I could hardly finish it, but I did, and I'm glad I did. And it's strange in a way how your career moves on and gets to a better place at the expense of the tragedy of others.
Yes, I have a
heart and a soul, but I never thought of much that way. I thought about, oh my goodness, I did well here, therefore I can go there. I did well here. Not thinking of some of the ramifications for family, for country, and for how we all feel about ourselves. But those stories got me to Ottawa, and Ottawa became home for a number of years.
You mentioned your wife. Mm-hmm. When did you marry?
We married very young, and we had she was a high school teacher. When we met in a bar, as usual.
As always.
Doesn't everybody meet in a bar?
Pretty much.
Yeah. I saw her, and I said, where do you go to school? And she said, LeBlanc High School. And I thought, my goodness, must have a fake ID, must be inside this Bathurst, New Brunswick bar. And I said, oh, that's interesting. How old are you? And you're not supposed to ask those questions. She said, I teach high school. She had gone to Laval University. She's back. She's a very sophisticated woman, unlike the hockey player, reporter kind of person. Right. And the rest is history.
Really? Yeah. Was it pretty much history from then on?
Yeah. But we had, like every family, you have your challenges, and one of the challenges was we had a little boy early in our marriage, and he didn't quite make it to a year old. He was Down syndrome, and it was frightening because in those days, excuse me.
Did you have any sense of it before he came out?
No, none. And you're just in shock. And in those days, you didn't have any idea, why did this happen to us? And sort of the town talks about what happened. Yes, they have in those days, the term they used in those days? Mongoloid. Yes. And used terms like mosaic mongoloid. I remember because he looked different, but not that different. And you had to go to Montreal and get a test done, and it was a lot of trauma. And I was doing play-by-play of hockey senior hockey, when he passed away.
Did he pass away at home?
In the hospital. He had pneumonia. And he was 9 months old, but he's still very, if he was here right now, he's there. He's right in front of me. Yeah. And he has always been. His name was Timothy James Alexander Munson. So a whole bunch of history behind that, maritime history. But he has been everything that I am, and try to keep myself focused on the things that I want to do, and in the Senate today. But he was born the year Special Olympics was born in 1967. That time it was Canada-U.S. Today it's 180 countries and so on. So we end up moving from Bathurst, but he was always there. So the work that I do in Special Olympics and the autistic community, and those with disabilities, physical and or otherwise, I always felt, as a reporter, whether I was covering some difficulties and violence in Cambodia, and you go to some of these camps, and you would see disabled children, who adopts them? Who takes care of them? And when I did those stories, I was really sensitive to the aspect of doing them. But I kept saying to myself at that time, if ever in my life, after television, if I ever had an opportunity to do something more and be part of this, I will do that. Well, good accidents happen, I guess, along the way. I never planned to work for prime ministers. I never planned, certainly, to be in the Senate. But in the last 10 or 11 years of my life, I've been able to use this vehicle called the Senate of Canada, and use the springboard of working for the Prime Minister to work on all these issues that my wife and I really care about, because it's a very team thing.
And a personal thing for both of you.
Very personal.
Something that's very deeply personal.
Yeah, very personal. And so it's always that. It is, I've done other things in my life in terms of news coverage, which has always felt important, whether it's politics or covering war zones. But it's children. to me, it is always about the child. The child, at the end of the day, is the one that is left behind in a war zone. Children are still being left behind in lineups to get treatment for autism. And it's always about the child, because it's a child in all of us. I think that we have to turn around and just stop for 1 second and say, how can you do more? Well, here I am today talking to you. And what am I talking about and thinking of Timmy is the children today that need our help and not to be ignored. So anybody who says a nasty thing about senators or the Senate, I'm saying if you work at it, this is a good place to be. I feel like I'm in a good place trying to do good things and trying to make just a little bit of a difference, whether it's through legislation, whether it's simple fundraising across the country.
Or awareness raising.
And awareness.
Yeah.
And awareness is so darn important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you look back on your career, you've obviously had the devastating personal moments, but you would also have had very fun, memorable moments as well. Was there a particular story or event that stays in your mind that you...
Well, thank you for asking that, because in the days of working, we did not have, when you came back home, you really had nobody to talk to. You didn't have stress therapies and so on and so forth. But, you know, the massacre in Tiananmen Square was difficult to deal with when you see young people again die.
And you
killed,
were in Beijing
shot,
for...
middle of all of that.
Yeah.
And that wasn't nice to pick up people and put them on trishaws in their death throes and take them to hospitals. That's one. On the Iran-Iraq war front, horrible being pinned down and shot and shelled, and your nerves are shot, but you have nobody to talk to except your family and your television crew.
Right.
But the bigger, and there was a bunch of others, you know, in our business way back when, you're covering Bang Bang, right? And if you don't go cover that story, you're not, you know,
a real journalist.
But the biggest one was the assassination of Indira Gandhi. Because when I was there, she at the funeral, and the millions of people trying to get closer to the funeral pyre, and to watch Rajiv Gandhi going through the ceremony, and just to look out and witnessing history and having read a wee bit about history of India and, of course, Gandhi. And I said, what am I doing here? How did I get here? How did I get here from Northern New Brunswick?
Right.
You know, in this historic place, doing an on camera about something so important in all of our lives. And you look at the India, the power it is today. I think that was a compelling historic moment for me in terms of covering events.
It's been such a pleasure to chat with you, and this is probably a show that we could have go on for another solid half hour of stories and conversation, and I appreciate that you would take the time to be here. Okay. And I congratulate you also for the work that you're doing to help families in Canada.
Thank you. You made me feel very comfortable.
Well, it's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine.